I have to admit that when I created this financial channel, I was a little bit shocked. I was a little disturbed at some of the comments I got on some of those first few videos I posted, because I received questions from several people about, isn't trading and investing immoral? Isn't it evil? Isn't it immoral to try to gain wealth through the capitalist free market system? Isn't everybody that participates in capitalism somehow immoral and evil? Wouldn't it be better if we all lived under a communist regime? Wouldn't all the people have an equal chance of achieving wealth and financial freedom if we all lived under communism? And I think the reason I find this question shocking is because of my age. I'm a little older. I'm in my late 40s, so I remember when much of the world actually lived under communist rule. I remember, the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union didn't collapse until, heck, I was in my late teens, right? So I grew up with that sort of that Cold War mentality that so many people had. We were all scared of a potential nuclear war at some point between the US and the Soviet Union. And at one point in time, I remember that fully 1/3 of the world's population lived under communist rule. Many people don't realize this, that, communism is not something that wasn't actually tried in a big way. At one point in time, 1 out of every 3 people in the world lived under communist rule, right? So it was tried. This experiment was actually tried on a large scale. And essentially, it failed, right? It collapsed essentially everywhere, right? At one point, 1/3 of the world lived under communist rule, and pretty much none of those countries are communist now. Pretty much all of those nations collapsed. There's really just a couple that still persist in that old school mentality, communism that dates back to that Cold War era. I mean, we still have Cuba as a communist country. We still have North Korea as a communist country. But that's pretty much, China, I know people are going to point to China as a communist country, but China has changed a lot here, especially in the last 20 years or so. They're much more leaning toward a capitalist free market system than the old school totalitarian communist way of doing business that they used to do. It's still technically a communist country, but they have certainly adopted many aspects of capitalism. And that's why China here in the last couple of decades has really risen in prominence. That's why their economy has really grown. As a matter of fact, the Chinese economy is the second biggest economy to the U.S. economy. It's the second biggest markets to the U.S. markets. And the reason for that is they really started adopting a lot of what the U.S. and free market capitalism was doing. I read a study recently that around 30% of Gen Z have a favorable view of communism. And, the more I think about that, the more it kind of makes sense, because I do think this is an age problem, because anyone that's old enough to have lived through the Cold War and remember the Soviet Union and all the nuclear scares and things like that. So anybody my age, anybody older, like the boomer crowd, certainly anybody in their 60s and 70s, they have a very different opinion of communism compared to the Gen Z crowd, because they didn't live through it. They didn't experience that world where 1 out of every 3 people lived under communism, and they've never really talked to people that lived under communism. I have, because so much of the world lived under communism. When communism collapsed in all these countries, I've talked to many people that lived in the former Soviet Union or in East Germany or in China, especially China. I've talked to a lot of people from China, because when I went to college, my university degrees are in music. I've got a couple of music degrees, and, there is a large percentage of people studying music here in the U.S. that are Chinese, right? China tends to send their citizens to the U.S. to get degrees from American institutions, and music especially is very big in China, and especially Chinese women. They typically come to the U.S. to get their music degrees. And most of the time when they're here, they're not just looking to get a music degree. They're also looking to find an American man to hopefully marry, so they don't have to go back to China, right? They don't actually want to go back to their country. In many cases, they want to stay here, especially when they come here and get a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree if it's a master's degree, or, if it's a doctorate, they may spend 2 or 3 or even more years here in the U.S. And they spend a number of years here in the States. They typically don't want to go back home. And I've actually talked to some of these Chinese girls that come here, when I was in college, and they would tell me, a lot about their country. And some of these stories are not so nice as far as, the hardships that the people live under, especially back then, when I was in college. You're talking about the late 90s. So this was not China today. This was China from, 25 years ago. And of course, I've talked to a lot of people that lived under the former Soviet Union, when people from Ukraine and Lithuania, and these people, they don't have a very high opinion of communism at all. And it's kind of weird because they lived under it. The people that lived under it do not have a high opinion of communism at all. But these very young people here in the United States in particular, they all of a sudden have this idealistic, utopic, almost fantasy view of communism, that, communism is the answer, that it's going to save the world. And I don't think they realize from a historical perspective that experiment, it has been tried and it has failed. I don't think it's these young people's fault. I don't think it's the Gen Z crowd that, I don't think it's their fault. They have these views, that they have these opinions. I think, again, a lack of historical perspective, and it's really our educational system that is to blame, because we don't do a good job educating our kids, at least not here in the U.S., but probably that's the case in many parts of the world. But the U.S. educational system in particular, for a first world country, our educational system is terrible. And we do not educate our kids properly. Most of them have absolutely no idea about history in general, because I can almost guarantee you that if I asked any of these people that have this favorable opinion of communism, how many people were killed, through mass murder and genocide and famine, forced famine, or imprisonment and gulags and concentration camps, how many millions of people died due to communism? These kids would look at me like I was crazy. Like, what are you talking about? I didn't hear about that, because they don't get that story. Maybe they did get that story in school, but maybe they just don't pay attention. And if you're one of these people that aren't aware of that story, right? If you weren't paying attention in history class as a younger person, let me go ahead and give you the answer. We really don't know how many millions of people died under communist regimes, but those estimates range from a really lowball number to maybe 20 million people to a really high number, as many as maybe 150 million people died due to communism in the 20th century. From, the Russian Revolution, the rise of the Soviet Union and China, and then pretty much communism spread throughout Asia, parts of Africa, parts of the Americas, right? And again, at one point, 1 in every 3 people lived under communism, and these people didn't necessarily choose communism, right? In many cases, these communist regimes came to power under force, and you don't come to power under force without actually taking power from people, right? And enslaving people in many cases. And tens of millions of people had to die for these communist regimes to take hold. And that's a story that just doesn't get told anymore. How many of these young people that are asking me these questions about capitalism and communism, which is evil, which is immoral, how many of these young people know that Joseph Stalin killed 6 million of his own people in the Soviet Union? And he killed 6 million of his own people deliberately. And there were several million more that died indirectly to policies that he enacted. Maybe he didn't necessarily mean for those people to die, but they still died because of him. But there were certainly at least 6 million people that he murdered. When it comes to genocide and Holocaust, when we start talking about the great genocides and Holocausts that have happened through history, many of the biggest ones happened in the 20th century, and they happened due to communism. For example, while we're on the topic of Joseph Stalin, do many people know that there was a Holocaust in the Ukraine and that Joseph Stalin killed 4 million Ukrainians? Moving on to China, how many people know all of the tens of millions of people that died in China due to Mao's regime and the rise of communism in China? Matter of fact, the Chinese deaths are to the point where we really don't have a good number on how many Chinese died due to communism. We estimate that it is in the tens of millions, but that number, who knows? That's why, coming up with a solid concrete number of the number of people that have died under these communist regimes, ranges from a low ball of maybe 20 million to a high number of 150 million. A lot of that has to do with China, is because so many people died in China, but records of it aren't good. We really don't know the number. History books tend to tell you that, between the Great Leap Forward and the Chinese land reform and then the Cultural Revolution, somewhere between 50 to 70 million people died in China. Think about that number. 50 million, 70 million. That's an insanely large number. You can't even imagine such an event. So naturally, when you talk to people that lived under the former Soviet Union or people that immigrate to the US from China, naturally, you don't find any of these people that have positive views of communism. But we can even go a little closer to home for us Americans. There are so many Cubans that live in Florida, right? So many people fled Cuba once Fidel Castro took hold in Cuba, right? Have you ever heard of any of these Cubans in Florida? Yeah, I'm sure you've talked to plenty of anybody that lives in Florida. You know a lot of people of Cuban descent. How many of them have a positive view of Castro or communism? But I really didn't want this to end up being a history lesson. Really, I want you guys, if you're one of these young people that have a favorable view of communism, go study some of the history. Go actually read a history book or go check out some articles on Wikipedia about communism in the Soviet Union and China, in Asia, Southeast Asia especially. Check out what went on in Cambodia and Vietnam, right? We didn't even talk about the killing fields in Cambodia. We didn't talk about the communist regime of Pol Pot and the millions of people that he killed. We could go on and on with these genocides and Holocaust, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to hit you over the head with that if you didn't know about it. But I do want you to actually look at these things objectively and actually go look at the facts. But let's bring this back to free market capitalism, and especially the stock exchanges and trading and investing. We've already talked about China being the second largest economy in the world. And why do the largest Chinese companies list on US stock exchanges? Why do Alibaba and Baidu and Pinduoduo, why are all these large, very large Chinese companies actually trading on U.S. stock exchanges like the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ? And this is really a global thing. Every really large company in the world, if they really want to trade seriously on a stock exchange, they trade on the U.S. exchanges. The U.S. exchange, really the U.S. markets are no longer just a U.S. market. They really are a global market. That's where every serious company trades. That's where every serious trader and investor trades and invests, right? They trade in this U.S. market because in a lot of ways, that's the only market that's really efficient. It's the only one that is truly free in many cases because, like the Chinese stock market, that's not a free market economy. They still have a ways to go. They adapt certain aspects of capitalism, from where they were in their communist journey, but it's nowhere near what it needs to be a truly free market. And really for an investor to have any hope of going to a job and saving money, working, putting away some money, saving some money, investing it in an IRA, right? You put it into a retirement account. And in order for that retirement account to actually grow, and through the magic of compounding interest and all of that, for you to actually make any serious money to the point where you can retire off of it, you have to invest it in an economy, in a market that is also going to grow, which the U.S. economy, it tends to grow, right? The S&P 500, right? If you look at SPX, the S&P 500 index, over its history, it tends to just gradually drift higher. There's obviously some recessions occasionally. There's some crashes occasionally. But overall, the U.S. markets tend to go up. And without that system, if you didn't have that to invest in, this sort of thing doesn't work. You can't do this anywhere else other than the American markets, and the reason you can't do this is because of the free market system and how free our markets are compared to really every other market in the world. But let's take a step back. Let's take a step back for those of you that propose that we should all live under communism. Let's scrap free markets. Let's scrap capitalism. Let's all live under communism because that'll solve the problem. All of these successful people, all of these rich billionaires, let's all just go back to zero and let's see how these really successful people are when we're all living under a communist regime. And now let's see how all of us, the little guys, the losers, right? Because the people that are complaining about capitalism versus communism, let's be fair, these people are losers in life. And I don't mean that as an insult, but let's be honest. You would not have these kinds of views. You wouldn't even have this kind of thinking unless you thought that, your life was in total shambles, you're a complete failure in life, and you're looking for an out. You're looking for an excuse of why you can't seem to succeed in life, and you're looking at all of these other people that do succeed in life, and you know what? It's the system. The system is rigged. The system is rigged for Elon Musk and Zuckerberg and, Jeff Bezos. Yeah, the system is rigged for those guys, and it's designed to hold me back. Communism is going to fix that. No. That is childish thinking. That's idiotic thinking when you think about it, because these people, why are they successful? Why is Elon Musk successful? Why is Zuckerberg successful? Why is Bill Gates successful? It's because of their passion, their desire, their drive to succeed, right? It was not happenstance. It was not luck, and it was not a rigged system that these people succeed. You could drop them off anywhere. You could take them from free market capitalism, a country like the US, and drop them into North Korea right now. And you know what? Elon Musk, Zuckerberg, these guys would be just fine, because, they would adapt to that system, because they would figure out what it takes to rise in power under that kind of system. They would still win at that game. Whatever game you want to play, they'll win it. They'll beat it, right? That's the kind of mentality that successful people have. And the losers in life, if you are a loser in capitalism, you're going to be a loser in communism. It doesn't matter. It's like the people that were financially just a disaster. You're a loser at life. You can barely hold a job. You don't save money. All of a sudden, you win the lottery. Most people that are really broke and then they win the lottery, within a couple of years, they're broke again. Right? It's because they didn't learn anything. They were a loser before winning the lottery. As far as a loser at life, guess what? Just because you got some free money, you're still a loser at life, and you're not going to keep the money you have. You're not going to invest it properly. You're not going to do financially responsible things because you weren't doing that before. That's going to be the same thing with this capitalism versus communism thing. The people that win at capitalism will still win under communism. The people that lose under capitalism still going to lose under communism. One of the real problems with communism is it just goes against basic human nature. I think this is another point that, the people that have favorable views of communism, that, one day communism will succeed. It didn't succeed in all of these dozens and dozens of countries that tried it in the past, but they didn't do it right. We'll get it better the next time, right? Well, no, the problem with communism is just inherently it goes against human nature, basic human instincts, human nature. And, humans naturally act in their best interest, right? We all strive to succeed. We all strive to make money, to make a better life for ourselves and our families. And life is a game. Life is a game, and we want to win the game. And that has always been the way people have been. It will always be the way people act. That's why people love sports. Why are sports so popular? It's because we love seeing people compete, to find out who's better, who's the best man, right? And I say man, woman, whatever it happens to be. But, this is our nature. This is why we love playing games, even if you're not a physically gifted enough to play a sport, why we play card games and board games, whatever it happens to be. We often compete against each other in the smallest little things, and that is human nature. Communism wants to take that away from us, right? It wants to basically say that, you are equal to everybody else. Your work is equal to everybody else. You're going to get the same pay as everybody else. You're going to share with everybody, all the spoils of whatever, that's not the way this works. And, the people that are actually successful people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, they're not going to participate in this kind of system. For one thing, people think what we're going to do is we're going to make a country communism. And then the people that really work hard and innovate, the people that really drive the country, like these billionaires, these tech billionaires that are really doing the heavy lifting for us, right? They're going to keep doing the heavy lifting. We're just not going to give them any money. Matter of fact, all the money they have now, we also have to take all their existing money. We're going to give it to all these people that really didn't do anything to deserve it. And no, obviously, that's not the way this works. It's never played out that way, right? The people that are the innovators, right? They're not going to participate in such a system, right? Then they're going to refuse because there's no incentive for them to participate in that system if they're not going to get paid accordingly. No one works for free. No one. Not you, not me. That's not the way we do things, right? This utopian view of communism where there are no longer any social classes and, we're all equal. That's utopia, right? That's a fantasy. That is living in imagination. The truth is that we are not equal. We can all be equal in the eyes of the law. I mean, when I say, there's no equality, well, there's equality as far as we can have legal equality, but we're not equal in terms of our physical abilities, our mental abilities, our willpower, our drive. We're not equal, right? Every single human being on the planet is unique in those aspects. And it is really insulting to try to tell two people that they're the same, that they're equal, that they're exactly the same, they're identical. And when I say two people, when in this case, communism, we're going to tell everybody, you're all exactly the same. There is nothing special about any of you. You're all just carbon copies of each other. On top of that, we have to enslave people for communism to take hold. That's why so many tens of millions, possibly more than 100 million people died under communism. And, because for communism to take hold in some of these countries like Russia and China, right, they had to take the possessions away from the people, right? You're talking about going to millions of people and taking their stuff. In many cases, taking their homes, taking their land. A lot of farmers had to give up their farmland. This was generational property that these people held on to. And naturally, what's going to happen is most of these people are not going to do that willingly. There are going to be fights. There are going to be wars. Millions of people have to die. And again, this really goes against basic human nature, the idea of not having private possessions. Because if we go all the way back to the earliest human civilizations, as far as recorded history, about 6,000 years ago or so, even in the earliest human civilizations, the idea of private possessions existed. That was just a standard concept. I do think it is a little telling about a person how they view communism and how they view capitalism, because I'll be honest, no one with a drive, perseverance, determination, a will to succeed, none of these people ever complain about capitalism. They'll never do it. Why would they, right? It's only, again, the losers in this game, right? The ones that for whatever reason, they're just not making it. They're the ones that want to complain about the system. Essentially, it is not wanting to take responsibility for your own shortcomings in life. That's all this is. Because, again, if you study history, this is already a failed experiment. Like, objectively, you can't say communism has ever been a success anywhere, right? We just can't do that. And then, again, millions of people are going to have to die for communism to be enacted. For communism, for example, to take hold here in the US, literally tens of millions of people would have to be murdered, because there's going to be tens of millions of people, I can tell you right now, that are not going to give up some of the possessions that they would have to give up under a communist regime. There's going to be fighting. There is going to be civil war, right? And is this something that you want? And then at the end of all of this death and destruction and chaos, you're left with a country in ruins. And are you going to be happy about that? Are you going to be successful? You were a loser under this prosperous capitalist system, and now this communist system that has completely wrecked the country. Are you going to be a winner under that system? No, I really just wish our educational system would do a better job, because I really think the only reason this whole communism thing is gaining such popularity here among our young people in recent years is just a failure in our teachers not teaching properly, not teaching history, but also getting back to trading and investing. If our educational system actually taught personal finance, how free markets work, because in many cases, that's part of the problem here is these people asking these questions about capitalism versus communism. They don't even know how a capitalist economy works. They don't know how it functions. And if you don't even know what capitalism is, obviously you can't really have a good objective opinion of capitalism. We need to make sure that every kid, every young person knows the basics of personal finance, saving, investing, trading, balancing a checkbook, even though nobody has checkbooks, but, balancing your books, managing debt, even things like making change at a store if you're paying with cash. Many kids can't even just in their head figure out how much change they're due back from a clerk or a teller. Our schools really don't teach things like entrepreneurship. We don't teach them about, important aspects of the financial markets like interest rates. We don't we don't teach them anything that they really need to know about to succeed in this free market economy. And therefore, they're in the game, but they're not really prepared to play the game. They haven't really been told the rules of the game yet. Generally speaking, most people don't even know what a share is. As far as a share of a company or equity in a company, they have no idea what that really means. Most people have no idea what a bond is. Most people have never even heard of things like futures contracts or options contracts. I mean, that would be a completely foreign subject to the average person on the street. So, some of these younger people that are asking me these questions about communism, I'm not angry or even really disappointed in these kids that are asking this question. I really think this is not their fault, right? These young people, they feel left out in our capitalist world because really our schools and in some cases our parents, we just haven't prepared our kids properly for the world that they live in. Anyway, just some food for thought. Peace, guys.